and welcome to episode 8 of the Music Minds podcast. I'm Tony Fennell, and joining me in Brooklyn, New York City is my co-host John Stone. How you doing, mate?
Sweating sweating to the oldies down here, man. It's hot as heck.
It is stupidly hot, I got to admit. And I know where you are, mate, so I know how hot you are right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, listen, today's episode, Synch and Swim Part 2, Getting Creative, is a follow-on from our first in our series on sync licensing. In that show, we discussed the basics of licensing your music for use in TV, film, commercials, and other forms of media. In this episode, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty about the work music supervisors do, what's involved in pitching music for sync projects, and what it's like to produce music directly for TV shows and commercials. We're also going to mix things up a little by bringing in a guest for today's show, Eric Masson. How you doing, Eric?
Hey, Tony, how are you?
Not too bad, mate. Eric is a music supervisor who's worked on independent feature films like SLC, Punk 2, Punk's Dead, and Before Someone Gets Hurt, and documentaries like The Anthropologist, All We Need Is Another Chance, and Live Fast, Draw Young. Eric also works as a creative at Memory Lane Music Group, pitching songs from their catalogue for various projects in all media, and in fact, my co-host John has worked with Eric on several of these projects, and is also a music supervisor himself. John is also a creative for the publishing company he works for, pitching songs from their catalogue for sync projects as well. So, they'll both be sharing their expertise, tips, and secrets to finding and clearing the right song for the right project. So, fellas, we'll be touching on the following topics on today's show: music supervisors and what they do, pitching music to a supervisor, and working on TV commercial projects as a music producer. Questions, here we go. So, without further ado, John, what do music supervisors do?
Why don't we let Eric take that since he's our guest?
Well, gents, music supervisor can be doing a lot, from running and maintaining the entire music department to working with a filmmaker one-on-one to the clearance part. It's kind of involved. There's a whole process to it, and it really varies from project to project. John, where should we start off with?
Well, I guess let's start from the beginning. So if you're meet up with a filmmaker and they're like, oh my God, I have music I want to use for my film. I need help. What can you do for me? Where do you get started? What's your first step, Eric?
I suppose it depends on where in the process we're jumping in here. So let's, in a perfect world, say we're jumping in early enough in the process and that the film or project has been shot or it's in production. And we're having preliminary talks with the filmmakers or content creators. Now, we always check to see if something is going to be integral and part of the narrative and the storyline, whether it's going to be on camera or weaved into the storyline. In any case, that might require a bit of a advanced reach out to in the clearance process to make sure that that's going to fly.
So you're talking about if a song is going to be like used on screen, you want to go to the publisher, and if they don't use a master, don't worry about that. But if you need to get the publishing cleared up front before you shoot that scene, right?
That's absolutely right, because there's nothing worse than having footage that you can't use because it involves a piece of intellectual property that was not cleared in advance.
Yeah.
And then you're just not going to use it at the end of the day.
Yeah. But that's where guys like me come in and they go, I can make it sound like that.
See, you will have to, Tony, because we've had this happen a few times where somebody had already done the scene, they had recorded the scene, and the music was live in the scene, and they're like, oh, we have to, I was like, wait, you have to clear that. And we've had other people who said, oh, no, that's part of the film, the background noise of the scene. So it's diegetic, as they call it, and they go ahead and say, we don't need to clear that. So you get a lot of different types of people when you're working with creatives, as we'll talk about later on, Tony. Okay, so we're on board. We're working with the filmmaker. They have a wish list of songs. We've determined that, just for our purposes here, nobody's singing anything that's copyrighted on screen or anything like that. So they have a wish list of songs. So then what are we going to do next, Eric?
Well, we're going to probably sit down with the filmmaker in a spotting session, in an ideal scenario, and go through and spot the film with them. Indicate scenes that music will be required, where there's going to be source music versus score music. Usually there's a composer involved and they'll take care of the score elements. But there's going to be those scenes that we know for sure are going to need a song dropped in there. And then from there, we work with the filmmakers and come up with a wish list, whether they know what they want or we're suggesting something. And you develop what's referred to as your temp track.
And also at this point, too, we would probably be looking if they're going to either have a composer on board. A lot of the ones that we've worked with, the first thing they do is get a composer. They know at least enough to do that. But sometimes if they need somebody to bring in a composer, that would be a job that we would do as well. We would find that composer for them and then sign them on to provide music for the film as well. So here,
I've actually sat and done spotting sessions, and in my memory of it, it's been a while. I mean, we basically took about 2.5 days because it was a pretty long film with a lot of music. Yeah. What's the general rule of thumb? Are you talking a day to 3? Is there ever the instance when it goes on for a week? I mean, how does this work?
Well, we've had at least 2 films that are scored with source music. So you're talking about a clearance every, 10 seconds sometimes.
Wow.
It can be crazy. So yeah, what's the most we ever had to deal with? I think we had about 45 clearances on one.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, 45 songs. So that was in many cases master and publishing that we had to clear for this one film that we were working on. So it can be nuts. And then others we've had to clear literally one song.
Right.
So you never know what it's going to be, but it's very important. And I've found, and I know with Eric too, the spotting session is critical because so many times the filmmaker doesn't really realize what they have, or what they need, what they're looking for. So being able to sit down there and go through second by second and basically create a pre-cue sheet, if you want to call it that, to figure out all the parts where you're going to need music or where they already have some music or they have temp already in or what. That's very, very important at that point. So, okay.
I've actually got a question for Eric. Eric, there must come a point when filmmakers and the producer go, and we want this, and we want that, and we want this. There's got to be times where you'd have to look at them and go, let's get real. Let's get real. The budget is this, and that is not going to cover that. I mean, how do you deal with that?
And that always happens with the most crucial song at the crucial point where they just want the moon and the stars and they don't understand how much that really costs or what the value of what they're looking to do is.
So, there are ways around that when, so many times, in particular when we've been working, we're working with a budget that is negligible. It's very small, or they don't have a budget at all, or they're planning on raising the money for the music. So we have to sort of tell them in advance what do you need to get. So it can be any number of things. One thing is almost always the case. Music budgets are the lowest, the last consideration, the one thing that nobody realizes, oh my God, we have to have money for that too. So you're always, as much as anything, I think in a lot of these situations, you're trying to get the filmmaker to understand that this is going to cost money. You can maybe do some short-term stuff, film festivals and whatnot, but if you're trying to clear what we talked about last time, Tony, all media theatrical or all media in perpetuity, that's going to cost you a lot of money, especially if it's a famous song. And you really, you're starting, trying to roll a rock up a hill when you're dealing with a filmmaker that doesn't understand that.
The other good side of this, and I'm sure you can shed some light on this, new artists have a shot here because, again, these smaller movies with no budget, they need music.
Right.
They need the music. And it's guys like you and Eric that can take that very music that I own and put it in front of people.
Sure.
I mean, these are real legitimate opportunities to make some money.
And you're absolutely right, Tony. And a lot of times, just like you were talking about before, you may say, okay, they want a black magic woman. All right. They're not getting that. Well, what can we find that would give the same feel, the same vibe, but is not going to be that kind of thing because they're not looking for it particularly for the song itself. They're just looking for that feel, that vibe in that specific scene. And you can use, you can find a lot of great music from independent artists that are comparable to a big track that will work just as fine.
And that's actually part of the fun in the whole process in that, anybody can kind of dial up any major band you've ever heard in the last 60 years and kind of with lack of imagination, just slap tracks in there. It'll be a popular. There's a whole host of other artists that are up and coming, or maybe some that were in the past that we never heard of. It's great to find that hidden gem that no one's really heard of, but it just works so well.
Yeah, I must say that is absolutely refreshing to hear. It really is. I mean, are you the guys that set the music budget? I mean, do you sit with a filmmaker and go, okay, we've got this. So this is in reality. Is that on your shoulders?
Well, I mean, we have to, talk to them and have them understand that you're not going to get big songs for the budget that you're working with. So if they're not able to raise more money, or if we really are limited, and I mean, we've actually had, Eric, we've had a couple where they won't even tell us what the music budget is. They just want it as cheap as they can get.
Yeah, that's real fun. Yeah. That's like fumbling in a dark room looking for the light switch.
It's like negotiating against yourself. It's like, well, I think we could get that amount, and then we've had a couple where we were like, well, we're going to get at least a minimal, a nominal fee, and they get mad because, this artist is so obscure, they should just let us use it for free. The film is going to make, and I'm like, look, I always come, and Eric, we both come from the music publishing world. You got to pay for something. I mean, get at least a small amount of money to the writer, to the artist, etc., just to give them, some understanding that you value their music. It's not just you're going to take it and use it and they can hopefully get a little bit of performance income down the road. It's there has to be some kind of fee for any use, even if you're talking about small level,
Whether there's a budget or not, there's this old saying John and I have been saying for years, is at the end of the day, the filmmakers will want it for cheap, for nothing, forever.
Yeah.
And basically, if the filmmakers are going to come up with money out of pocket, or there's going to be money coming in, they want the cost to be as low as possible. But like John just said, at the end of the day, they are going to have to pay for something, and what the best we can get for them, that's our job at the end of the day as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because you're right. Music is always the one that gets kicked in the nuts, to be honest. I mean, when it comes to movies, it's like, well, hang on, do we get a good track, or do we get that shot in the dark from last night that we couldn't get because the lead actor was out having a drink in the back, and you know what, the music can suffer instead. I'm being a little bit negative, but it's the truth of the matter. Yeah. Let me ask you one question. I'll ask you another question, guys. On the last episode of this, in the Synch licensing episode, we talked about the cue sheets. Who does that? Would that be done via the filmmaker and production team, or is that down to the music supervisors?
That is generally a music supervisor's job. And so once you've gone through the process, we've got all of our music in there. The composer has put their music in. We've got all the source music in the film. Everything is set. Then at that point, once they've gone to picture lock and sound lock, then we can go take that film. And we've been working along the way, so we already have pretty much of a very good, good idea of what music is in there, where it is, how long it's used, etc. And then we can create that cue sheet from that, and that's usually the last job, right? Right, Eric?
Yeah, that's done at the very end, and ultimately at the top, that can be the music supervisor, or if they're fortunate to have a coordinator or a licensing agent helping them along, someone else can help them, but they will ultimately prepare that for the production company, whoever that be, filmmakers or what have you, and then it does get sent off to the performing rights organization so that they can collect performance royalties and pay out.
Touching on what you said a little bit earlier, Eric, about finding the hidden gems and the bands up and coming. I mean, in many ways, you music supervisors are somewhat tastemakers, and again, I asked in the last episode of this a direct question to John, and maybe you can jump in as well, Eric. How do these young kids get to you? To Eric Masson, to John Stone, how do they get to you? And let's not go down the drink route, guys, because we're not doing that. No. How on earth do they get to you?
That is the magic trick, and there are. I think I have my list at my job of music supervisors and also people that work in the music departments of networks and film studios and such. we've got well over, close to 1,000 individuals, people that are doing this kind of work. There are more coming in every day. A lot of people who are, have been made a film, became fascinated with the music piece, and they want to do it themselves. So there's a lot of people that are doing this. Some of them are terrific. I've worked with some really wonderful ones, very professional and everything. Some of them are a little looser, so to speak. So you have to, there's a lot of different ways. They obviously aren't broadcasting their email address and their mailing address and stuff, because they would just get inundated. And believe me, all the supervisors I've ever talked to, they have stacks and stacks, in the old days, CDs, but they have terabytes of music that has been submitted to them, and they're constantly listening and cataloging it and saying, save something for a rainy day. I pitch one, we do a pitch every week for a couple of projects, just sending stuff out, and just as much as anything, trying to get people to music supervisors to recognize that we have certain tracks that they might not have thought we had. They think we're an older catalog, the one I work for, but we do have some new music as well. So sometimes it's just signs of life as much as anything.
Is it, Eric? I mean, have you ever gone I'll look down YouTube? I'll go on to YouTube.
I was just going to say, sometimes I do like kind of just meandering around and finding stuff via YouTube or Spotify. Sometimes I'll punch in a song and just see what the algorithms come up with and suggest songs in that vein. And I do kind of like finding songs that way too. I also like kind of the old school of, keep my ear to the ground and just kind of talking to people, going to shows. If a friend has a band, they let me know about it, or someone that I know, someone of a friend of a friend. I do kind of like interesting, kind of round the back door kind of ways of just getting on the radar of things. Sure, some people send emails and, LinkedIn messages and say, check out my music, which I do. But it's kind of that interesting, that kind of looking and finding things when you're not really set out to looking for it are the best ones. That's where you find the best results.
Yeah. You want to find what shows they're working on. IMDb.com is actually very good for this. But you're watching your favorite show. You're watching Glow on Netflix, right? At the end, in the end credits, you're going to find who the music supervisor is for that show. So then go and do some research. You got to do the legwork like you do with everything else, and see if you can. Some of them do actually have websites. Some of them do actually have the ability to communicate with them directly. A lot of them obviously don't. A lot of them, as just Eric said, have a LinkedIn page or something, but don't use that as like, hi, I'm a great musician or a great songwriter, and here's some wonderful songs. You gotta be a little craftier than that, and you find the web, where they're going, try and do it as organically as you possibly can, because the next and make sure you have all your stuff out in as many platforms as you possibly can, because they'll look. I mean, we know music supervisors, they're always on the prowl for something, and if you have that happy accident and they know this song works perfectly, they're going to go and grab it, and they'll come to you.
Well, that's the treasure that is social media. Again, we've talked about this on earlier episodes, John. You've got to use those channels. You're your own A&R man. You're the guy pushing that stuff, push, and that's why going and finding a record company to pitch to is one thing. Going and finding music supervisors like yourselves. I mean, it's not like you walk around with a big button on your jacket saying, "I'm John. I'm a music supervisor," or maybe you do. I don't know.
Well, we used to go to Billboard. Used to have a music in film and TV conference. Yeah. And the joke was, and of course, one of the big draws was that they would have several big supervisors there and talking about everyone there has music. They're all trying to get it to them. And we always used to I always made the joke as at the end of the session, it was like, the Night of the Living Dead moment, because the entire audience would surge forward, waving their CDs or waving their thumb drives or waving their cards and whatnot to get to the supervisor, and the supervisor would some of them would literally run out the back door of the stage because they did not want to have to deal. So you became tricky then, you wait for them outside or something when they think they're safe.
And the worst was always some guy saying I could do classical, hip hop, heavy metal, country, all of the above. I said, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's like, okay, and you can do all of that, not very well. well.
Well, he's a man for all seasons. I think the other thing that we have to emphasize here is you get all right. I've met you guys. I'm about to give my music. You actually go back. You give it a listen, and I know from experience that both you guys will give it a listen, and I'll do hats off to you there.
Sure.
But what I am saying is, if you've listened to that music and you go, you know what? This is all right. And you just happen to be working on a movie and they go, are you sure it's clear? Mm-hmm. Now, there can't be any more. And now this is directed to you, Eric. I mean, I've hung with you enough to know that you're quite a mellow guy. But I'm sure that you would lose your crap if you've pitched it, somebody's going to love it, and you find out that the song isn't cleared. You've got one guy arguing about, no, that's half mine. And I mean, you've got to have your music cleared before you hand it over, correct?
Well, Tony, you have seen me at my best times and my worst times, so yes, you're spot on with your description. But no, actually, that's the first thing I think of when I listen to a song, and it's actually more important or prevalent when I'm working on a project and it actually matters, the timeliness of it. That's the first question I asked him. I said, "What are the splits? Are you guys registered? You know, do you have representation? Do you have a publisher? Are you on a label? If they do it all themselves, it's a little more dicey because you just have to kind of go on their word. But if it's all registered, you do kind of look it up and you make sure everything's cool, nothing crazy with the ownership or agreement between themselves. Say it's a band, or that you don't have some ghostwriter in the back lurking. But yeah, that's the first thing. You never want to have it come and bite you in the rear when you go to the filmmaker and say, here, try this song, and they love it, and then you're like, great, can we clear it? And they're like, yeah, about that. It's you can't really do that.
Yeah, about that. You'll never work in this town again, son.
Yeah.
I mean, there's got to be, John. You've got to have tons of horror stories, surely.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just going to say, we've had a few where, and some of them, literally nobody's fault. It was a song that somebody wanted to use in one of these. It was a rap song. They have about 800 or 900 writers, and some guy had, 6.25%, and we could not find him. We could not find him anywhere. It was like, wow. I think, Eric, you wound up talking to his father or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the number that BMI had was for this guy's father.
Yeah.
And he didn't know where he was either.
So I was like, okay. But it's always the one with 6.25% that wants $5,000 for their share, because it's like, I'm going to have this in a movie, I'm going to make millions. And that's another thing, as we've been talking about with budgets. Budgets are not, even for some of the biggest projects, you rarely are going to find a huge budget for music, unless it's a very music-heavy film and they've really financed based around the fact that the soundtrack's going to be great. Oftentimes, you are dealing with very small budgets, even on big projects, and especially television, big successful TV series. A lot of them will not have huge budgets, especially if you're in indie, putting your music out there yourself directly. But yeah, we've had a few experiences. The old I don't know what I want, but that's not it. When you're trying to pitch music for them, something that you think is absolutely great, you've tracked it to the visual, to the video and everything, and they don't like it for whatever reason, and it can be a little hairy.
The dichotomy is right here, you see, because as an artist, if your stuff's been lying dormant, right, you've got all the low-hanging fruit at the publishing companies. Madonna, she's always going to get picked up. They're all going to be. I'm right at the top of the tree here. No one can even see me anymore. And a movie comes up and they say, we got no money, but we want to use your song. You don't want to give away stuff for free. But that stuff has happened and bands have got an extra kick. You know what I mean? That same band can go back out on the road because they were at the end of a movie, a decent movie. I know one band that happened to. And, it is interesting. It's a weird one. As a manager, you'd go, we're not doing it unless we get paid. As an artist, you've got that catch-22. If it's not on there, they don't know. If it's on there, and then people start saying, who is that?
Well, regardless of the fee or take at the end of the day, the placement is going to that's going to be king. I mean, obviously you need to be compensated and you have to be, taken care of at the end of the day to want to do it. But, you mentioned about it earlier about being music supervisors, being tastemakers of sorts.
Yeah.
I mean, we're about 15 years past the dubbing of TV is the new radio, and getting your song into a TV show is just as important, if not more, than getting it played on the radio. You know, how many times John mentioned it earlier about a premium cable programming will feature a really cool track in a great moment, and you will soundhound it or Shazam it or go look it up on any kind of website. There's various websites out there that you can look up what played on what show, but people actually can see an uptick in their following after a good placement, especially on TV.
Yeah, and the opposite of that. We talked about this last time, Tony, with Stems. We had a great indie band who they had gotten their music into an episode of Teen Mom, but they were like, and this is very much the way MTV does business across the board, and the production companies particularly that work with them. They just want you to send stems because they're going to remix and redo everything with it. For those who don't know, stems are the individual tracks from a recording so that they can split out, and if they just want to use the bass or the drums or something like that, they can do that. And we heard it, and it didn't. You didn't even know the song was used.
Or more importantly, John, remove the vocals so it turns into an instrumental.
And it's like, what's the point of that, you know?
Well, it's for CV only. You know, and that's it. It becomes one of those things that when they look at you on Wikipedia, they go, "Oh right." I mean, I've been lucky enough to have a little bit of music in film and on TV, and some of these songs, you know, I had I think 4 or 5 songs on Nash Bridges, which was a detective show.
Sure.
When was it, in the 1940s? Sorry, no. So and basically every song that was used in a jukebox in a bar with people getting beaten up. I was like, oh, all right. So, you know, I'm like, there I am in the background just as that guy gets kicked in the face, you know. But it's like...
and that's a diegetic use there.
It's one of those things it's on my CV.
Yeah.
Does it really matter? Nah. But, you know, it paid relatively well.
Yeah.
And,
you get your residuals, right? You get a little bit when it goes into reruns and stuff.
The great payers... Exactly. The great payers, I can't remember what the exact, I think it's the magic 27 or 26. As soon as you get that amount of episodes, it goes on to major rotation. I had that on a certain show on PBS. I've had a couple of shows on Disney, on Viacom. You know, I've done pretty well. And it's interesting. They are the holy grail, those things.
Yeah. How did you get into that, Tony?
Oh, I'd run out of money, John. And no.
Well, that's how everyone gets into anything.
It's actually partially the truth, but a mate of mine and a mate of yours, a guy called Billy Coben, owned a small little production company in New York City.
Wow.
And we became friends, and one day he said, I'm working on a TV show, and I was like, really? And he said, yeah. He said, you know what, I actually need some music for it. And I went, well, I'm your guy. So I went up and I was like, just show me what you got to play. And I was a lunatic that could play pretty much anything. Give me the piano, ding, 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 ding. You know, banjo. Yeah. With no strings on the banjo, I'd turn it into a drum. It didn't matter to me. So, nice. You know, and before I knew it, I was doing it on a regular basis with him. We got quite a few shows. I moved on from there and I ended up working for Disney quite a bit.
Wow.
And it's been good.
Sure, and it can be consistent work.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, you get a good gig and you get a good rep in the business. It's a very small community, right? And a lot of it is just word of mouth as much as anything. So next thing you know, you get a good rapport or a good reputation from a gig, and you know, people are knocking on your door saying, "Yeah, I'd love to have you work with us on this and such." So you know, it's even with music supervision, it's still a fairly small community.
Yeah,
and the people who handle it, because it's a very specialized thing, as you're saying. I mean, doing sync, synchronizing your recording to something visual.
Yeah,
that's not something a lot of people can do, and understand how the music is going to interact with the visuals on there to build that that story and help tell that story. That's a rare talent indeed.
Well, we should absolutely do a show on that, because it really is. It's a whole different bag of tricks. You know, sitting down and writing a 3-minute pop song, I used to think that was pretty difficult, and then all of a sudden you've got an hour and a half worth of picture to score to, and invariably, and you guys know this, invariably you go, all right, we got this song, and they go, well, we're going to change the end, and then there's a piece in the middle, and then you go, what? And all of a sudden, all that work and the way, one refrain ends, and then the next part comes in, and it's like, it's a piece of genius. And then all of a sudden you realize it's not going to get used, and it's like, okay, scrap, next. But look, guys, Eric, I would absolutely love you to come on again.
Oh yeah, I'd love to come back. Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
John, good call, man, because our Eric knows what he's talking about.
Yes, sir.
Eric, we'd like you to be a regular. If you'd do that for us, it'd be lovely.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to do it.
Everybody out there listening, thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can find us at musicmindspodcast.com. Till then, Eric, John, see ya.